All right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I can. So Jane, you'll just have to be real quiet. That's okay.
Okay.
All right.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to this third and last of our series in the lay pastoral ministry. Peg and I are thrilled to be with you one more time. Excuse me. I apologize if I sound like a frog off and on here tonight. Again, this is who we are. And Peg, I believe you have a chalice lighting for us.
Yes, I'm going to share the words of J. Krishnamurti. When you are listening to someone completely, attentively, then you are listening not only to the words, but also to the feeling of what is being conveyed, to the whole of it, not part of it. Again, that's from Krishnamurti.
Thank you, Peg. Before we go into the sort of content for tonight, which I'm sorry, it's going to be about ethics and boundary setting for our last session, I just wanted to address some loose ends that I want to make sure we wrap up. So I think it's really important to know that there's a distinction, once again, between the fact that this is a program of pastoral care. It's a ministry of presence and support. It's not pastoral counseling, which is something that a person does who tends to have a degree. And a pastoral counselor works with someone to make a change in their life, and that person should have a certificate or some sort of degree. And secondly, I just want to reiterate this. I think this is incredibly important. And this I got from Barbara Myers, who serves as a community minister at our Mission Peak congregation in Fremont, California. And she wrote, "Our Pastoral Associates program is set up to help people who either have a short-term need of high intensity or people who have a long-term need of low intensity." In other words, we aren't looking to provide long-term support of high intensity to anyone in our congregations through this program. And if people have, long-term high intensity needs or even short, sort of scary, if you want to say high intensity short-term needs, we need to make sure to help them find other resources outside our congregations because it's not something we're set up to do. The other thing I think that's important, and Peg will circle around back to this later on, is that when you're working with someone, when you're working with somebody one-on-one, you want to explain again what your role is, and make your expectations clear so there isn't any confusion later on, such as, hi, my name is Lois. I'm here to meet with you, and I can probably meet with you today and maybe 2 or 3 other times. And if you're still finding you need some more support, I will help you find resources out in the community, something like that. The other thing is it's really important to remember that we aren't diagnosticians. We aren't prepared to say, well, that person sounds like they're bipolar, or they have a psychotic disorder, or they have an eating disorder. That's not our role. That it may be true, or it sounds like we say you're an alcoholic, but we don't do that. We just may say, sounds like your drinking has become a real issue for you. There are some places to check that out further, some ways to sort of get that diagnosed. But we're not diagnosticians. We are basically there to be accompany persons on their journeys.
So, tonight's topic is ethics. Ethics, I've always thought of as being somewhat imprecise. The process of becoming sensitized to ethical issues is to raise questions and have conversations about different kinds of situations that we can get into. But often each situation needs to be evaluated as its particulars are. But the overall goal of ethics and pastoral care is to remember that we want to be primarily caring about what is best for the care receiver. So we want to judge our decisions and our behavior based on how well we're serving the needs of the care receiver. We're not here to meet our own personal needs, and that will come up in different ethical situations where we could be tempted to meet some of our personal needs. So I think we want to remember that it's not about me. So ethics raises our consciousness about issues. It makes us be more sensitive to things we've thought of in the past so that when the situation comes up, we can be more prepared to think through what we want to do. It's essentially, the baseline is wanting to recognize the common worth and dignity of all of the people that we serve. And if we remember that, if we remember to treat people with the dignity that they deserve, then we will probably be on the right road to ethics. Ethics violations can damage the whole congregation. So we have a big responsibility. If something happens in a lay pastoral associate relationship in a congregation, it could spread throughout the congregation and can become a damaging thing for the program itself. And the other thing to consider is that the care receivers who are coming to us are having a hard time. They're vulnerable. There's something going on that's a transition in their life that they would like some help with to be well listened to and journeyed with. When we're in that situation, we have some vulnerability. So we have to consider that there might be some power differentials at that point if someone is feeling vulnerable, and that just raises our responsibility all the more, that we want to be very sensitive to decisions we make. In professional social work, you make sure that you don't have dual relationships. You would not see in therapy, if you were a therapist, someone that you see in you wouldn't see your friend, you wouldn't see your next door neighbor. You would keep relationships separate. In congregational life with lay pastoral programming, dual relationships are really built in that the other person is also a member of your church community. You may even have served on a committee with that person. So it's a little different. And I think that in larger congregations, you can consider that more in what referrals we do, so that you might separate out people that tend to interact a lot together in a congregation. But in the small, probably not realistic. So I think we just have to recognize that dual relationships is a factor within congregational life with pastoral programming, and be sensitive to what that means. You end up at the finance committee together. Obviously, one of the ethics then would be that you would not be giving any information about the fact that you also have this lay pastoral associate relationship.
You know, in addition to that, Peg, I think it's also, what do I want to say? Sometimes people afterwards feel embarrassed, or because they have been so vulnerable with another person, and it definitely changed. They may not feel comfortable talking to you again in the congregation. I mean, I think that can happen too, don't you?
Yes, it can. Mm-hmm. You know, say that we might have conversation with the care receiver. What will it be like when we see each other in social hour? You know, how will we interact, and just talk about it and have it out in the open between us. That can help.
I also
maybe
think
take away some of the awkwardness.
when you talk about expectations up front, just say to that person, maybe, how would you like to handle our interactions when we're in a committee meeting? If you're feeling uncomfortable, to let them know that the information you've shared with them is confidential, you won't be bringing it up. So you sort of let them know, here are the parameters up front, but if they're feeling some discomfort, then to talk to them about how would you like to deal with this, how would you like to handle that?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I don't think so.
So I also wanted to try and distinguish tonight between, I hope I can do this well, between secrecy, privacy, and confidentiality in this program. And there's actually legal definitions, believe it or not, of secrecy that are determined when you're trying to make decisions in terms of legalities. But secrecy is basically, when you think about it, the practice of hiding information. You know, think about middle school girls. It's all about secrets and, you know, cliques and hiding information from one group so that only the other group gets it. It's all about intrigue, and it's horrible and it's hurtful, and there's this kind of ickiness surrounding it. So secrecy is also known legally as clandestiny or furtiveness, and it's the practice of hiding information from certain individuals or groups while perhaps maybe sharing it with other individuals. Whoops, let me say one more thing about secrecy. Keeping a secret may also be about protecting those who know. If this information would get out, there would be a whole lot of trouble. But secrets are divisive to the community. And without accurate information, people start to make assumptions about what really might have happened in a situation. There's a lot of rumors, there's misinformation. All of that can circulate and cause division. That is really true in church congregations. Then there is privacy. And legally, privacy, or I shouldn't say legally, the way it's defined in some dictionaries is literally the right to be let alone. It's also a freedom from interference or intrusion. So privacy recognizes that basically each person has a sphere of existence and activity, this is legally speaking, that properly belongs to the individual alone, where they should be free of constraint, coercion, and even uninvited observation. How one behaves behind closed doors, at least as long as these do not lead to any significant threats to others or society. That's a definition of privacy. Then we come to confidentiality. And confidentiality means that information is going to be shared within a relationship and is not going to be shared outside of that relationship. It refers to information that is either spoken by us or written by us or somehow is about us. It's not just verbal exchange, it's electronic exchange or technological exchange or written communications. Just remember that the information that is shared between you and the care recipient or receiver is information that belongs to them. It's not yours to share, to gossip about, anything even close to that. And confidentiality is not secrecy, it's not even privacy, it's about, once again, upholding the well-being of all persons in the community. So, as in the church, hopefully, and as lay pastoral caregivers, we don't keep secrets. We respect persons' privacy, and we keep confidentiality. And, as always, there are exceptions.
There are times when disclosure is important in order to prevent harm to someone else, to prevent serious and foreseeable and imminent harm, either to our client, our care receiver, or to someone else. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the exceptions to confidentiality. First of all, whoops,
That was my issue. Sorry, Peg.
That's okay. First of all, a court order. Now, I'm familiar with Washington state law, and what I want everyone to consider, that you're from all different states and even Canada. I'm going to be giving some areas of concern and processes that you will want to double check with your jurisdictions on for the rules that you follow. But I think that when I talk about what it is in what state, it will help you get the sense of what to look into. And probably there are a lot of similarities. So in terms of court orders, lay pastoral people do need to respond to court orders. The only people in ministry that don't are clergy who have received information in a sacramental situation, such as confession. So there is no protection in our state for lay pastoral people. As Lois has said, the information that we have about the care receiver belongs to them. So it is possible to share that information if you have written permission from the care receiver. And there will be times when you, as a lay pastoral person, are feeling stuck about a situation that you're trying to help with, a person you're listening to, and you want some consultation from your team. I'm going to assume that your lay pastoral teams are going to meet periodically and that you will provide some group consultation for each other, as well as you have someone that is supervising you that can also provide consultation. But what if you were in a group meeting with your team and you wanted to get some advice? What if the situation you described, because the community is so small, it would really share who that person was that you were providing listening presence to? Is that okay? That's a question your team needs to talk about, and what your norms for your team meetings will be. And if you decide that it's okay to describe situations that might be revealing of identity, then you will need to have an ethic of confidentiality for all the material that's shared in a team. And then, of course, abuse reporting. If you are a person in a congregation who is simply taking over a casserole to someone's house, and you notice something, that maybe a child with a bruise, or you have a concern about the safety of someone, you probably aren't responsible just as a volunteer. But if you are in a lay pastoral situation, so you have a definite role in ministry that is, really more formal than simply a volunteer taking over castle, you do have a responsibility in Washington state to report child abuse. Now, there are different ways to do that. I would suggest the first thing, though, you would want to do is call your supervising person, and you and that person will probably want to also talk to an attorney that you would have available. But there are three kinds of reporting you can do. There's an anonymous reporting where you give information to CPS, to Children's Protective Service, but you don't give your name. They check to see if that child is already in their records. So whether or not anything comes of it, you won't know. But if there's another level is the confidential reporting, where you give your name to law enforcement, and your name could come out in future court processes. And then there's the full report, where you just divulge it all, and they are free to share your name as they feel appropriate in investigations.
Hey, Peg.
So,
Peg, before you go on.
Yeah.
Because you're breaking up occasionally. So I just wanted to clarify something about this reporting. And this is clear. If someone does not in any way, shape, or form want to have their name on that report, because maybe it's a physical abuse situation and they also feel like they could be potentially threatened, can they still tell a minister and let the minister make the report?
Yes.
So that way they could protect themselves that way?
They could.
Because in Montana, in fact, this was something I discovered when I served there, is that it was incumbent on the minister, not any of the volunteers, to make the report. It was interesting. So that's why. So I'm just asking if people are feeling like they're personally at risk by making the report, but they feel ethically and morally compelled, they could talk to a minister or a professional. Sorry, that's what I wanted to just clarify.
Yeah. And I really don't think that a pastoral person would be making a report without the minister, assuming you have a supervisory minister. I think that's something you would do together.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
I see that we are having a lot of problems with choppy audio. I don't know that I can do anything about that.
I just carry on as best I can.
Okay. Let's see. There are some other reporting that we would want to look into. There is a law that relates to reporting harm for people that are in the separate law of dependent adults that you would want your team to look into. I would say that if you see something in a nursing home, that you should report it, and there's special places to call for that. And then there's a third law about developmentally disabled people, which we may be required to report, but it's a little more ambiguous if we know of any exploitation within state hospitals or nursing homes. I doubt that that's going to come up in our programs, but those are the three categories. And then
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. And then the final disclosure would be if you know that there be physical harm to either the care receiver, perhaps they have disclosed something to you that they feel they're in imminent danger, or perhaps they are feeling suicidal, then that's another situation where we would want to respond and not just keep that to ourselves. So Lois, I think that you're going to talk a little bit more about suicide now, right?
I am. I also wanted to just say that I'm freezing up now on the screen. And that has to do with when you're in the hospital. And if you feel that the person that you're visiting isn't getting the care that they need or some sort of neglect, you have the right to go to basically an ombudsperson. Usually every hospital has a place for you to report your concern. It can even be with the charge nurse on the floor. But I had that experience recently with a congregant whose partner asked me, this is what I think is going on. Would what should I do? And I said, I'm almost positive there's an ombudsperson, and we followed the procedure, and everything turned out just fine. But I just wanted people to know, I mean, that's another place where you're vulnerable. People are incredibly vulnerable in hospitals these days. And it's almost as if the person needs an advocate with them whenever they're in the hospital, because so much does go on. And I just wanted people to know that there are avenues for addressing that as well, if you have a concern. Suicide. You may or may not be in conversation with persons who are feeling suicidal. And there are warning signs. I'm not saying that everybody who suicides gives you any of these signs, but often there are some indications ahead of time that it isn't an act that comes clearly out of the blue. So if a person is threatening to hurt or kill themselves, if they talk about or ask about ways to kill themselves, in other words, seeking access to pills or weapons or some other kind of means, if they happen to be talking or writing about death or dying or suicide. And friends, I just have to say that I think a lot of clergy will tell you that they're on Facebook these days, not because they're sharing the details of their personal lives, but because congregants often will share things that are going on in their lives on Facebook, but they won't necessarily call the minister to let them know what's going on. I have people text me from the ER now to let me know what's going on, or they'll post on Facebook that they're in the ER. So, when I say talking or writing about, it also includes texting or Facebook or other social media. If people express very strong feelings of being hopeless or feeling hopelessness and despair. Anger. It's interesting that a lot of people who present with depression don't present with sadness. They actually present with anger or with rage. And then if people are talking about seeking revenge, that could potentially lead to those murder-suicides that so often seem to happen. If persons are feeling trapped, like they have no options, like they just say, there's no way out of this, there's just no way out, it's a red flag. If they are increasing their use and or abuse of alcohol or other drugs, and you're noticing that. If they isolate, they withdraw from their friends, they withdraw from family or from society. The other thing that I have noticed, or at least in one case, is that folks who fully intend to suicide don't seek out friends or family that are going to talk them out of it or get them the help that would prevent it. They will probably go to people who either understand that situation but aren't going to interfere with their actions. If somebody's in a deep, deep depression, it's very interesting. Folks get very upset with people who suicide. They say, how could they do that? It was such a selfish act. Didn't they know, they had children, they had a partner that loved them, they had so much to live for. People don't understand, if you haven't been there, depression is tunnel vision. And it doesn't matter that you have children or that you are deeply loved. All you feel is pain and despair. There is no way out for you, and all you want is for that pain to end. And for that person who then suicides, it is in their mind a rational decision. It is the best way to alleviate the pain. So I just want to let people know is that I don't call it a selfish act. I call it an act of despair and trying to take care of oneself, believe it or not. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what happens when a person is that deeply depressed and in deep emotional, psychic, or spiritual pain. Sometimes folks who have experienced a loss they feel like that life isn't worth living. They want to end their own life. I mean, it doesn't have to be a person. It can be an animal, that they feel so deeply attached to. I have heard those words from people who have lost animal companions. Other signs. I hear somebody in the background here. Is that Jane?
That's me, I'm sorry.
That's all right. So other signs that people are like anxious, they're agitated, they have high anxiety. One of the things, unable to sleep, or that's one thing. If they're so wound up that they can't sleep, not sleeping has a huge effect on our, again, emotional, psychic, spiritual, and physical health. And other people respond to depression or despair by sleeping all the time. And when I talk about sleeping all the time, I'm talking about like 18, 20 hours a day. Most folks don't sleep that long. If a person communicates to you that they just see no reason for living, that they have no more purpose in their life. I talked with someone who said, I think I've done everything I wanted to do. I think I have lived long enough. And for them, suicide was a very real option for them to consider. They did not do that yet, but I was very interested to hear them say that, I have done everything I set out to do. I think I have lived long enough. If someone starts to make, quote, final arrangements, like they start giving away special possessions or sometimes any of their possessions, like their car, or they say, here, this is my beloved, this or that thing. Those are warning signs. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is if they lose interest in something that was once like at the center of their life, that's a signal something is up.
Lois,
yeah. You want me to go back?
I think about suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The problem is very deep and painful, and so I think then that what needs to happen is the person needs to be protected for long enough for an intervention. It might be biochemical, it might be time, it might be therapy, but to be protected long enough so that temporary situation goes away.
I think that's brilliant summary of that, Peg. And I like that, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. The trouble is sometimes, especially in our day and age, is getting someone to agree to that kind of help. That, I've heard people say, oh, I'm not going to the hospital to be treated badly there. Oh, no, I'm not going to take psychotropic medication because it's all big pharma and it's all a scheme. People can throw you roadblocks, but you're right. When someone is feeling incredibly suicidal, I think the best thing that we can do is get them someplace where they are safe, that they cannot harm themselves. And if you're talking with someone and you think that you suspect that they're suicidal, don't mince words. Don't, try and dance around it. Use the actual word. Say, are you having suicidal thoughts? And it's not about how could you possibly, are you having suicidal thoughts? How could you possibly be having suicidal thoughts? You have so much to live for. Really, a question is, it sounds like you're really in deep, deep despair. I'm wondering if you're thinking about suicide. And, what I like to say about all teenagers is, everything is big drama and a lot of angst. And I would be surprised if there's a teenager walking the earth who hasn't thought about suiciding and just talks about that. It seems to be a time of life. And some people say, oh, I just think I'll go kill myself. That's what you have to gauge is what's really going on here. And to figure out what the intent is of what they're saying. And to find out, do they have the means to kill themselves, to suicide? Do they have a plan? Like, oh yeah, this is how I'm going to, drive my car to this point. I'm going to go off this cliff. I am going to shut myself in the garage with the car on, this or that, or I have these amount of pills, or I have a gun, or, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I'm saying. Do they have a plan? Is this method highly lethal? And just the other thing to know is that men tend to use more violent means to kill themselves, and women tend, like hanging or a gun to the head or into the heart. Women tend to do pills. It's not to say that this gender only suicides this way and that one only suicides that way. but from what I understand, that men tend to use a more violent method. The other thing you have to ask is intervention possible, and to find out, have they made a suicide attempt in the past? You know, some people make 4 or 5 attempts, and sometimes they actually succeed. I'm sorry, let me just back up here. Hang on, I want to get you some more information that I didn't actually put on a slide. And that's this next part, which is additionally. So the other thing to remember is a person who is actively suicidal, or you're very concerned about, they can't be left alone. And if you can't stay with them, then you need to arrange for somebody else to do so, or someone, a partner, a friend, a family member to come and be with them, or to make sure they can be taken to an ER where they can receive immediate treatment, hopefully immediate treatment. I can tell you that in the state of Washington, or at least in the Seattle area, that there are people who are sleeping in the ERs for up to 24 hours before they can find admission to the psych units in the hospitals. So we have increased demand with decreasing resources. The other thing just to be aware of is that there is, at least in the States, there is an 1-800 suicide line that people can call at any time. I would be surprised if Canada doesn't have something similar. And if you're talking to the person on the line and they're talking about what they're going to do, I feel like it's incumbent upon you to say, I can't leave you alone like this, and it sounds like you're about to do this. I need to let somebody know, even if it means calling the police, frankly. And their hands are tied too these days. I mean, people have to really be presenting as about to harm themselves or somebody else. If you're talking with someone and they've talked about, you know, this is not a new feeling, they have felt this in the past, ask them, you know, what's helped you in the past to get through this? See if they can strategize and remember that they were able to survive these feelings before. One of the things that I've only come to learn recently in my adult life is that for most of us, the feelings are not something that lasts longer than probably 15 minutes at a time. They don't, what I'm trying to say is that just because you're feeling this way now does not mean you will feel the same way forever. That this too will change, even periods of despair. And so don't guilt people about how they're feeling if they're feeling suicidal, like, you know, you've got 4 kids. How can you even be thinking this? How could you possibly even go there? Not helpful. And the other thing is if they say, you know, please don't tell anybody that I've told you this, you need to say very clearly, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Your life is too important. This situation is too serious. Maybe you and I can talk together about who should be told and how to include them in that decision making. You want to add anything else, Peg?
Not on suicide.
Okay.
But the perspective then is we've been talking about a number of different situations where we might not be able to keep things confidential. But it's always because of what our care receiver needs. It's in the best interest of our care receiver.
Right.
So the final consideration I wanted to share with you is just in general, when do you speak about something? And I love this little series of questions. I find it's helpful to me in my own life just when I'm making a decision about whether to say something about perhaps a conflict I'm involved in. So here are the questions. Is it true what I'm thinking about saying? Is it kind? Is it the right time? And is it important? 4 little questions that I think are good guidelines for us in our personal lives, as well as what we want to when we're involved in lay pastoral work. Another question about sharing of information is, what kind of records do we keep? In general, I think we keep very little records in lay pastoral care. Minimal records. Let's see what we have here next. Minimal records. I think it's good to keep a log of who you are seeing and on what dates, but I wouldn't keep content information on that log. I don't think there's a necessity for that. Just the date, and if there are any safety concerns, if there are any reporting, then yes, that should be documented. But other than that, I would keep the very bare minimal, and even that should be locked up. There should be a place at church where they can be kept locked. They shouldn't be in your car or, you know, in your den at home where other church members may come over and visit. And I believe that the records should be available to the care receivers should they want to ask. So that's also a guideline. I mean, what would you want to put in there, and then have them, if they ask anything that you've kept. So those are my philosophies about keeping records in lay pastoral care. Another big area of ethics, of course, is sexual ethics. We need to consider several things about sexual ethics. I don't want that yet. Sorry. When you are seeing someone and listening deeply, that can become a pretty intimate, sensitive relationship, an authentic relationship. And we are human beings. We are whole-bodied human beings. And it's certainly possible that you could start feeling some sexual feelings for the other person, or they could start to feel them for you. So I think we just have to be aware that that's, of course, a human dynamic. And I think we need to watch ourselves. We need to be our own witness for what's going on inside us. And that's certainly a time to talk to a supervisor if you're starting to feel that way. Now, in general, I think it's important to consider the location of our meetings, partly for making sure that the place is appropriate and that there would be no questions asked about what happened. The church office, it would be great if there's space for you to meet with people in the church office. A coffee shop is a public place is a good thing, except for sometimes a coffee shop is too public and maybe folks wouldn't feel like getting as deep in their sharing as they might in the church office with privacy there. Home visits, that's a good question. To meet with a particular person at their home. I think that's something that you have to decide on a case-by-case basis. Let's say that you've met with someone a couple times, and in fact, the two of you decide you do want to have a deeper relationship. Maybe you both are feeling this attraction for each other. How do you handle that? I think that it should be immediately talked about with your supervisor. And I don't think in a church environment can say that two people can't have a relationship, but I think that would have to be processed in a very careful way. And I think there would need to be some kind of a meeting with the supervisor and the two people and have a ritual of terminating the pastoral relationship. So just things to consider. May not ever come up for you, but it should be carefully processed if something like that should occur.
Peg, the only thing I want to add
Do you have anything? Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing I want to say is that what's sexual? You know, I mean, we often think about, oh, it's a physical attraction, but I think it's also very possible to fall in love with somebody and to fall deeply in love with them. And frankly, I find that just threatening, as maybe having a sexual relationship with them. So if you find yourself falling in love with the person that you're in this, you know, lay pastoral relationship with, time to back off of that one. You know what I mean? I'm just saying that unless that's something you think might be mutual, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't just have to be sexual is what I'm saying. It can be an emotional or even a very, 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 very deep spiritual bond.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I wanted to add about that.
Okay. Gifts. It's entirely possible someone might want to give you a gift. What would your team want to develop in terms of a policy regarding receiving gifts? I think that sometimes they're just little gifts, you know, maybe a little bag of candy or something. But what if it's something bigger? What if it's something of more value? I think we need to be careful about receiving valuable gifts because I think they could have meaning that could be unspoken and then could be in the relationship and cause awkwardness. It might be that there might be some expectation on the part of one or then because of an obligation of a valuable gift. I'm going to give you this gift. You're going to keep seeing me. So just to be sensitive about gifts and the meaning of gifts. Anything more on that, Lois?
No, I think you've said it pretty clearly that the thing about it, I'm just reiterating what you're saying, is that is a gift truly a gift or is there something else behind that? I mean, is it one of these, you know, I'm giving you this, therefore you will. Mm-hmm. And this will, you know, cement our relationship and our continuing ongoing. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In general, there are several steps for preventing ethics violations that just help us in our programs. And one is to have, whoops.
Sorry.
One is to have the clear job description. You're clear what you're doing. The congregation is clear what your job is. The care receiver is clear. As Lois said earlier, let the care receiver know what your role is. Another is to have the available supervision. We've talked about that before. A third is have screening procedures. So all pastoral associates should have records checks with your state patrol or your local police or I'm not sure what they call them in Canada, but whoever the law enforcement people are, records checks should be done. And you do that by getting the lay pastoral person's written permission to check the record. References on potential lay pastoral people is another way of screening. Self-assessment. In the first session, we talked about self-assessment, having the potential lay pastoral people think about their lives and what kinds of situations they feel comfortable with and not comfortable with, and really doing some of their own self-assessment as to whether this is the right time for them to be doing this work. And finally, to have a signed ethics promise statement that everyone on the team signs, and I like to have a ritual in which we read through the ethics statement and we sign them together, and we bring them up to a table where the chalice is already lit, and so that's a formal ritual that really raises up the importance of all of our ethical promises to each other as a team. We're going to be sending you a model for that you can adapt and make your own, but it has statements such as this: I understand that in order to protect the rights of those church members with whom I visit, I will follow these instructions. I will keep all names and instructions confidential, with the exceptions of, and then we talk about abuse and the times when we have to disclose. I will report any suspected child or elder abuse. It has some more detail on that. I will promptly discuss with my supervisor information received from a care receiver that has to do with imminent harm to someone, either the care receiver or someone else. And I will refrain from any romantic and sexual relationship with the person I'm serving, and any complications would be discussed with my supervisor. So that's an example of ethics commitment that you can put together. And finally, it's useful to have a referral list of resources for the team because in one way it says, I only have a limited role here. I'm going to be meeting with someone for 1 to 3 times, perhaps more serious or lengthy care needs should be handled by professionals out in the community. So to have a list of resources is a way of helping us keep our ethics and responsibilities clear. Do you think of anything else, Lois?
No, I have a question for you. Peg, when people cycle off from being providing lay pastoral care, is there also a ritual for that? Do you have a ritual for that?
You know, I haven't developed one for that, but that sounds a good idea.
Well, the reason, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here is that it's important for the community to see that that person is no longer in that role. And it's important for them to be acknowledged for everything that they have given to the community at large. And for them to sort of understand that what they have heard is still theirs to keep confidential. But it makes it clear to the community and to them that really this role is now over. So that's just
I think that's a very good point. So you're talking about a ritual there. Perhaps we haven't talked about a ritual of beginning. Actually, if you're developing a team and you have people trained and ready to go, that's the time to have perhaps a service on lay pastoral or just pastoral care or some related topic, and install your lay pastoral people in some ritual of understanding about what their role is in front of the congregation. It's a good idea to do.
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things to do in church life is to find a really good way to acknowledge and thank people for the work they do on behalf of the community, and that I feel like you can't say thank you enough, and to even just have them come up during a joy or a sorrow, if you do that in your congregation, or if you have any room in the service to ask someone to come up and recognize them for their service. Having been, let's say, a lay pastoral care person for 4 years, they are moving out of that role. We want to thank them for the care that they have given for this community. It doesn't have to be this big, long, drawn out thing, but I think it's important. If we begin, we should end. So that's my 2 cents on top of everything you've said, Peg.
That's good, Lois. Thank you for that.
Sure. We're going to get into something. I am not a scientist, but I understand that sort of black holes are these things that can just sort of suck you in and take you elsewhere. And maybe it's a different cosmological name, but there are people in our congregations and in our own lives who are what I call emotional black holes. And these tend to be folks who come to us with needs that far exceed what lay pastoral caregivers or even clergy can offer these folks. It's not to say that their situation isn't dire, that they receive our compassion, but that we also are very clear to draw boundaries. I have found that these folks tend to take up a lot of time and energy, and then they burn people out. I've also found that they can make their way from lay pastoral caregiver to lay pastoral caregiver, without letting, just sort of presenting as if they've never talked to anybody before, and the story gets repeated and repeated. So it's really important that the lay pastoral care team does communicate with one another. What our group does is we check in once a month. We meet for 2 hours, closer to 2.5, actually, and sort of talk about how folks are doing. We actually do use names, with the understanding that this is a confidential situation. And because we do have that compassionate connection circle, to clarify for those of you who might not have been on that earlier webinar, I learned this from Rick Davis in Salem, Oregon, who I think he asked anybody who would like to be held in the care of a circle to come forward after the service, and a small group of people will be with them. The person will be in the middle, and maybe they all lay hands on, and Rick will put his hand on them and maybe say some words. The mistake that I made was that I had that go on in my office, which meant that people would sit down and get comfortable and hold forth. Or the same people would come week after week, and they would just take up the pastoral care team's time, even though we have people shifting who's in the office. So we now push the chairs away and only let people stand. But to try and limit that kind of sort of, it's really a sort of almost a violence of emotional spewing is what it ends up feeling. And some of the lay pastoral caregivers, literally felt sort of assaulted by some of this stuff. And this is from people who really are on the edge in so many ways and are looking for anything to find some support. So I have 2 mantras. One is boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And the other is refer, 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 and to hold the line. I have huge boundaries. I'm a big person anyway, but one of the emotional black holes sees me in the church and goes the other way. But we'll try and find some other of the lay pastoral caregivers. But they have now all sort of been brought onto the same page about that. And the other, something that may happen if, I'm going to give you an example and explain why I'm bringing this up. There was a service that I was not leading, but I was present. And as I came into the sanctuary, one of the ushers said, "See that woman over there? She's drunk as a skunk." So I thought, okay, I'm going to stand in the back and I'm going to keep my eye on her. And in the congregation that I serve, people still come forward, line up to share their joys and their sorrows. And they line up on a certain side of the sanctuary, and then they very orderly, and they take their stone and they come to the microphone. This person just beelined it from where she was right up to the mic, and I thought, here we go. So I just walked all the way up around, and she was, slurring her words and moving from side to side. And I could tell this was going to be about an hour rant. And so I just went up to her and put my arm around her, and at the same time just pushed the mic down and away from her. She was crying at this point, and led her away and sat her down. And I mean, I almost got drunk myself on the fumes. And I was sitting with her in the front row of the sanctuary as she was sort of continuing to, carry on. And I just sort of had my hand not around her anymore, but on her leg or something. And there was a man in the congregation who I think thought that I wasn't being very pastoral, and came out of the choir and came behind her and really put his hands on top of her to try and offer comfort. I give you that example because people don't always know maybe why we're holding certain boundaries and lines. That there are people who are, if they can't get it from Peg, they'll go to Lois. If they can't get it from Lois, they're going to go to Frank. And if they can't get it from Frank, they're going to go to Ken. So you have to be communicating and hold the boundary. Again, that's why I reiterated at the beginning today that the lay pastoral care programs serve members and friends of our congregations who may have short-term, high-intensity needs, or maybe long-term, but not an every day, every week, every month even need to be in conversation with a lay pastoral care person. So boundaries, 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 and refer. I think it's one of the big responsibilities for every time a minister comes into a new congregation is to find out what are the resources in the community and then to share them with their lay pastoral care team. Anything else you want to add to that, Peg?
Well, I think that team having good communication then is going to serve particular people who are more needy, and it's going to serve the congregation. So to put some boundaries around certain behaviors, and also just to be consistent and try to provide what is best for that person because you're communicating as a team, it just makes good sense.
The other thing that I just want to throw in here, because this came up in my congregation, is that we don't happen to have a committee on ministry at this point in time, and there are a lot of reasons why not, and we're going to probably have a healthy congregations team. The reason I bring this up is that there was a conflict going on with some folks, and people wanted the lay pastoral associates to be brought in to mediate it, and I had to say they are not trained for this. They are not mediators of conflict in congregations. They are providing accompaniment and pastoral care. What they might do in a situation of conflict is just listen to somebody who's having the conflict. But it's not the lay pastoral care team's job to get involved in the conflict with the congregation or to mediate it. I just wanted that to be clear as well.
In our congregation, the role in regards to a congregational conflict would go to what we call the Congregational Concerns Committee, not the pastoral care team.
Right.
So we do have that separated.
Right. And it should be. Did I do that right? Yes. Here are the things that I said. I didn't realize I actually had notes on these. Sorry. And the last thing that I want to say to you is that self-care is incredibly important. Again, to have your own boundaries, both your own personal ones and the program, the whole lay pastoral associate or care program needs to understand what its boundaries are, its parameters are. Again, you're not conflict mediators. You are accompanying people on their journey. One thing that I think is really important is if you're going to be meeting someone, that you have time to prep yourself prior to and some space afterwards, that you're not fitting them in between, a meeting at work and having to pick a child up and then have to go to another meeting. To make sure you have time around that. And if for some reason the conversation that you have is triggered something in you or is deeply upsetting to you, to debrief with another lay pastoral care person or a minister or the supervisor. I also think that one of the best things that lay pastoral care teams can do individually is have a strong spiritual practice. I don't care what the practice is. but to pay attention to developing and nurturing that for oneself. It will help you be centered and be able to be more present to the persons that you're interacting with. And I also think it's really important to know when you need to say no on the team. If you've just lost a parent, it's probably not the time for you to go and hang out with somebody whose parent is dying. You might need to say, I need to pass on this. You may even need to take a 3-month break for something. I tell preachers, don't preach about something in the pulpit that you're going through at the time. You don't preach about it until you're through it and over it and have a perspective on it. It's the same thing to folks on the lay care teams. If you're in the middle of it, you're probably not going to be a great presence to somebody else. After you've gone through it, though, and you have some perspective and some distance, you'd probably be the perfect person for that, for the next individual to talk with. And know thyself. Know who you are. Know what your boundaries are, what your skills are, what your gifts are. Know your own triggers. Know your own triggers. I mean, who knows? You're gonna find them. You're gonna find ones you never even knew you had, or somebody you're talking to and you light up like an elevator panel because they have just pushed every single one of your buttons. That's okay. Just make sure you debrief afterwards. If you are not in a good place yourself, if you have not cared for yourself, you're probably not going to be in a good place to care for somebody else. Peg, you have anything else you want to add about self-care there? Yeah.
I think the spiritual practice is the key. It's to have a spiritual practice where you can be a good witness to yourself and what is going on inside you and being able to be in the present moment with yourself. I think that's key. I'll just emphasize that.
I just want to bring one thing up, even though it's not something, okay, we have about 5 minutes to go. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up. I guess I should. I would like you all to read the last issue of the UU World, because what they brought up was the notion of sexual offenders, and is there room in a congregation for persons who have been sexual offenders and persons who have been sexually abused. This discussion tends to be incredibly emotional. Of course it is. It's highly charged. And the re-entry of a sexual offender into a community is something that has to be absolutely, what do you call it? It has to be play by play. It has to be actually, sorry, I'm losing all my words here, outlined. And it has to, the minister has to be the one, or the board, if you don't have a clergy person. Yes, you can get copies of those PowerPoints. They have to be the one to meet with that individual, to find out what the offense was, to find out if they're meeting with a parole officer, what kind of support they're getting, where they're living, and to figure out if that they think that is possible for the congregation to be able to have this person enter the community. And if so, it's probably going to be a lay pastoral associate that's going to be asked to be in relationship with that person, to be with them, accompany them when they're on the premises, at services, et cetera, et cetera. Just saying, those articles sort of came out of nowhere, and it might have taken some people by surprise. And so what we're being told by these articles is that we should be having these discussions in our congregations. And I also am a firm believer in dealing with things before they're in a crisis mode. So I'm just putting that out there, and aware that we have 2 minutes left.
I want to add to that our congregation has policies written that are accessible on our website on just those situations and how to process them, and how I as minister am responsible to bring a team together to make a plan. And you're welcome to go to our website, which I will type in for you. It's wsuu.org. So now, yes, are there? We only have a little bit of time, but I'm wondering if any of you have any questions. see.
I just want to ask one question where it says buy the book. Do you mean B-U-Y the book? I don't understand the question from Tahoma. We will get you, yes, the PowerPoints will be available. So we're giving you a few seconds to check in here. Oh, to my word searching. I was looking for choreographed is the word I was looking for. Thank you. If someone is going to re-enter, it has to be choreographed down to perfectly choreographed. Thanks for trying to help me out, Linda.
The issue there is safety for the congregation and also safety for the new person.
Right. Any other questions for folks who aren't quick typists like Linda at Tahoma? Peg, you were going to talk about these laws in particular, right?
I did. If you're in Washington State, here they are, so you'll be getting that in the mail.
And again, like Peg said, if we've got people from, we won't do that one. If we've got people from at least Colorado and California, and try to find out what the legal, you need to look up in your own state, what are the reporting laws? What are you legally bound to do? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, elder abuse, people with disabilities. Anything I'm missing there, Peg?
People in nursing homes.
Thank you. And there's usually a state ombudsperson for folks in nursing homes. Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you these 3 different sessions and to do this work with my colleague Peg Morgan, who has literally written the book sort of on lay pastoral care, written one of the books on it. And we'd like to end our time together with this reading from Joanna Macy from her book, Dharma Reign. Is it my imagination to think that we have been chosen to live at a time? The stakes are really high at a time when everything we've ever learned about interconnectedness, about trust, about courage can be put to the test. Each one of us is a gift. The earth is giving to itself. Every anguish, betrayal, disappointment can help prepare us for the work of healing. If the world is to be healed through human efforts, I am convinced it will be by ordinary people, people whose love for this life is greater than their fear, people who can open to the web of life that called us into being. May you all be such people, people who can heal, accompany, and be present to one another.
Amen.
Amen.
And be well, everyone.